Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to jump right into it because there's a lot to cover today. So, in the last 2 weeks or so, there's been a lot of hot gossip on the economic side of the news. Now, if you don't know what the Fed Reserve is, it's basically the central bank that controls the interest rates across the US and sometimes influences the financial circumstances of interest rates throughout the world. So, there are some important players here. The main thing that happened is that the Federal Reserve decided that they were going to hold interest rates steady. Now, this is interesting because there were two people who didn't agree: Christopher Waller and Michelle Bauman. These two people were the dissenters, and this actually marks the first time since 1993 that somebody within this group disagreed when they were making a decision. That's really interesting because a lot of the time, everybody is in agreement at the table. Now, I'm going to dive into more specifics about what's going on there in a second. Right now, you can see here are the votes. So people voted to hold the rates, and then there were some votes to cut the rates by these two individuals. Now, the Fed funds rate has been steady at 4.5% for the last couple of months. When we look at where things are right now, what we see is basically a steady interest rate that the federal government is keeping because they don't want to lower interest rates and pump everything up. The reason why stuff gets pumped up when interest rates go down is because people are more willing to borrow money since it's technically cheaper. Oh, if I borrow $100 from you, I only have to pay back $2 instead of $5. Okay, I'm going to go and spend that money on Chipotle or something, or whatever it is that I want to spend it on. So people borrow more when the interest rates are lower. And what ends up happening is that stimulates the economy, yes, but that also causes inflation. So then there's so much money moving around everywhere, stuff starts getting more expensive. Now, what happens when there's already inflation? If you already have inflation and you're lowering interest rates, inflation gets worse. That's the general macroeconomic theory that people have. And I think there's a lot of evidence out there to support this. You can go look it up. So the point here is that there are these folks who, Michelle Bauman here, Christopher Waller, who were Trump nominated appointees who voted against the steady interest rate. They wanted it to be cut. Now that's really interesting because then it starts raising the question, is this a politically motivated economic situation here? Or is it just they happen to have a different perspective relative to the people who are already there? Are they disrupting the status quo, bringing a new idea, or are they actually just trying to do whatever it is the president wants them to do? These are interesting ideas. So the Fed cut seems pretty certain after the recent inflation data came in. Now, well, I'm talking about in September. Right now, they're still holding steady, but what happened after they said that they would hold steady, about a week later, is that we saw two things: the consumer price index and the producer price index, and both of them seem to indicate that inflation has not gone away and is still here. So what I really want you to pay attention to is the right side. This big red line, this is bad. This big red line over here, this is also bad. That is how much the producers are paying for stuff, and that's not good. So if it's higher, it's more expensive. People are not going to like that. If you lower interest rates, then you can make it easier for, let's say you're running a business and you need to borrow money in order to buy a hot dog stand in order to sell hot dogs. But you can only borrow 3 because interest rates are too high. But if interest rates go lower, maybe you can borrow 5. This is a crazy example. I don't know how you would borrow an additional 2 just from a small 25 basis point cut. But that's just an example to give you a gist of what's going on here. Now, this means that, again, because of this inflation, there's a very high likelihood that come September, the Federal Reserve is going to cut those interest rates. If we look at Polymarket, they say it's about 70 to 75%. Last time I checked, it's 72% now. While the CME group says it's about, they were saying it was about 90% or so, but now they've lowered that number. Now, I took this screenshot a couple of days ago, so this is a little bit out of date. But generally speaking, people are in consensus that the Fed Reserve is probably going to lower interest rates. So just to reiterate one more time, interest rates are basically how expensive is it to borrow money. So if it's cheap to borrow money, then I might get a mortgage, because a mortgage is just money that you borrow to buy a house. Credit cards are just money you borrow to buy stuff because your paycheck hasn't come in yet. There's a lot of different reasons why businesses might want to borrow money. And that, I think, is one of the interesting things that tends to have ripple effects throughout the economy if the interest rates are either too high or too low. So this right here is just kind of a summary of everything I talked about. The CPI, the PPI, again, these are prices that either the urban consumers are paying or domestic producers are selling things at. This part right here is just boring numbers. You can go look it up yourself if you want to. Kind of covers some of the interesting things that were going on if you want to dive deeper into the numbers. So this is for PPI. There's really one big takeaway, which is that the PPI surged 0.9%. And that's actually the biggest since June 2022. Now, this is really important because what I've read, and I don't know how true this is, but generally speaking, what I've read is PPI starts to go up before the CPI goes up. In other words, producers' prices start going up before consumer the consumer price index goes up. So we need to be careful here because it seems like the effects of inflation just haven't been witnessed yet, and they're starting to come into effect. And this, I think, is part of the reason why the probability that they will lower interest rates seems to be going down a little bit, because the truth is there seems to be an unexpected rise in the producer prices. So the interest rates might need to stay high if we don't want to make the inflation worse. Coming up this week are retailer earnings. So we're talking Walmart, Home Depot, Target, Lowe's. These companies are probably going to give some investors an idea of how the economy is doing from a consumer standpoint. And they're probably going to be really interested in how much money people are still spending on stuff like at the Home Depot or at the local Walmart or Target. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is that there are oftentimes weak signals, or there are things that might not affect the larger economy, and they might just be specific to individual stores. So maybe Walmart has a partnership with, I don't know, Pokemon or something, and so then they get a surge of people coming to their store. So you can't just overly rely and say, oh, this company's earnings were bad, therefore the entire economy is bad. But it might give you some idea about what most people are doing or buying, or how most people are feeling, especially when you look at where people are putting their money. Because as the saying goes, people need to put their money where their mouth is. And the truth is, most people spending patterns will deeply reveal a lot about how they are doing in the economy. All right, that's it. That's all I have for today. I am going to probably start making a couple of more videos, make them more rapid fire, keep the information a little bit more concise so I don't bore you out of your mind. But thanks so much for listening in. I hope you stay tuned for more information. I'll catch you in the next one.